Just mend the crocheted sweaters, then leave, the cowboy said, until he saw love in her eyes. The sun had just begun its slow climb over the rolling hills of Texas, painting the fields in soft shades of gold and amber. The little town of Willow Creek was waking up, but it moved slowly, like it had all the time in the world. Birds sang quietly in the trees, and the occasional hum of a distant tractor drifted through the warm morning air. On the main road, a figure appeared on the horizon, dust rising behind him with every step of his horse. He was a tall, sturdy man dressed in worn jeans, boots caked with mud, and a hat that had seen many years under the blazing sun. Eli, a cowboy known for his quiet nature, rode steadily toward the center of town. He had not planned to come to Willow Creek that morning, but something in him had insisted. In his saddlebag were several crocheted sweaters folded carefully to avoid further damage. They were gifts from his late mother, worn and cherished for years, and now they carried memories he could not let go. Eli had always been a man of few words, preferring the open range and the rhythm of the cattle to the chatter of townfolk, but today he needed help. These sweaters were delicate, intricate, and beyond his skill to repair. As he approached the small yarn shop on Main Street, he slowed his horse. The building was modest, with a pale yellow paint that was starting to peel at the corners. A small wooden sign hung above the door, swaying slightly in the breeze, reading, "Clara's Crochet and Threads." The windows were filled with colorful yarns in every hue imaginable, neatly stacked in baskets and on shelves. It looked like a place that belonged to someone gentle, careful, and precise. That was exactly what Eli needed. He dismounted, tying his horse to the post outside. His boots made soft thuds against the wooden porch, and he took a moment to brush the dust from his shoulders. He paused at the door, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The bell above tinkled softly, announcing his arrival. Inside, the shop smelled faintly of lavender and warm fabric, a comforting mix that made him pause longer than he intended. Behind the counter stood Clara, a young woman with kind eyes and hands that looked made for delicate work. She looked up from the sweater she was repairing and studied him silently. Eli noticed the way her brow furrowed slightly in curiosity, but she did not speak. That was fine by him. He preferred it that way. "I need these mended," he said, placing the folded sweaters carefully on the counter. His voice was low, calm, and just a touch rough from years of outdoor work. He gestured to the sweaters. "They belong to my mother." Clara's eyes softened as she took in the worn fabrics, the careful stitches that had begun to unravel, and the faint scent of the ranch clinging to them. She nodded, picking up the first sweater and running her fingers gently over the damaged spots. "These are beautiful," she said softly. "Your mother must have been very talented." "She was," Eli replied, his gaze dropping to the floor for a moment. "She made these for me when I was a boy. I've never really known anyone else who could do this." He paused, as if unsure whether he should say more. "I need them fixed, but I don't want them changed. Just mended, like they were meant to be." Clara nodded again, understanding more than he could know. There was a quiet reverence in the way he spoke, the way he touched the sweaters as if they were alive. She could tell these were not just fabric and thread. They were memory, love, and loss woven together. "I can do it," she said finally, smiling faintly. "I'll take good care of them. When would you like to pick them up?" Eli hesitated. Normally, he would have given a quick answer and left, preferring not to linger where people might ask questions he didn't want to answer. But something about Clara's calm, steady presence made him pause. "Tomorrow," he said finally. "I'll come by tomorrow." Clara smiled again, but this time there was a subtle warmth in it that made Eli feel unexpectedly unsettled. He nodded, gave a small tip of his hat, and left the shop. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, carrying the faint scent of yarn and lavender after him. He mounted his horse, feeling the familiar rhythm beneath him, but he did not ride away immediately. For a moment, he looked back at the shop, noticing the way the morning sunlight caught the edges of the window and made the colorful yarn inside glow softly. As he rode back to his ranch, Eli thought about the sweaters, about his mother, and about the strange pull he felt toward the little shop and the woman who ran it. He had spent most of his life in wide open spaces, where conversations were short and simple and feelings were kept tightly inside. But now, a small flicker of something unfamiliar had appeared in him. Curiosity, maybe, or something deeper he could not name yet. The next morning, Eli returned to the shop. The town was quieter now, most of the people still busy with their daily routines. He tied his horse outside once more and entered. Clara was already there, humming softly as she worked on the first sweater. The light from the window fell across her hair, giving it a golden glow that made her look almost like she belonged in a painting. Eli cleared his throat softly. "Morning?" he said. "Morning," Clara replied without looking up. "I started on the first one." She held it up, showing him the careful stitches she had already made. "It's coming along nicely. Your mother's work is wonderful." He nodded, examining her hands as they worked with precision and care. They were gentle but strong enough to handle the thick thread and fabric. He felt a strange admiration, not just for her skill, but for the patience and dedication it took to work this way. Over the next few hours, Eli stayed in the shop, leaning against the counter, watching Clara work. They didn't speak much. He wasn't a man for many words, but there was a rhythm to their silence that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Occasionally, Clara would look up and smile, and Eli would nod or make a small comment. Small talk, really, but it felt significant somehow. As the morning turned into afternoon, the sweaters began to look more like their original selves. The holes and frayed threads disappeared under Clara's careful hands, replaced by neat, invisible stitches that made them whole again. Eli could feel a weight lifting from his chest as he watched. These sweaters weren't just being repaired, they were being brought back to life. And with them, a part of his past. Before leaving, Eli finally spoke more than he had all morning. "I appreciate this," he said quietly. "Not just the work. You make it feel right." Clara paused, setting down her needle and looking at him fully for the first time that day. There was a softness in her gaze, a quiet understanding that made his heart beat a little faster than usual. "I'm glad," she said simply. Eli nodded again, tipping his hat. "I'll come back tomorrow for the next batch," he said. This time when he left, he didn't look back immediately. But deep down, he knew he would. Something about Clara, the way she worked, the calm confidence in her presence, it had lodged itself somewhere inside him. And for a cowboy used to living with dust, dirt, and solitude, that was a feeling he didn't quite know how to handle. As he rode back toward the ranch, the wind carrying the faint smell of leather and hay, Eli realized that the little yarn shop had already begun to change him, though he had no idea how much. The sweaters were important, yes, but something else had started. Something quiet, subtle, and undeniably alive. A spark, maybe, or perhaps the beginning of something he had never allowed himself to feel before. Hope. The next morning, the town of Willow Creek was bathed in soft golden sunlight. The streets were quiet, and the air smelled faintly of dew and freshly turned earth. Inside Clara's crochet and threads, the shop was peaceful, filled with the soft rustle of yarn and the quiet tapping of needles. Clara was already at work when Eli arrived. He tied his horse outside as usual and pushed open the door. The little bell chimed gently, announcing his arrival, and Clara looked up from her work. "Good morning," she said with a smile that seemed warmer than yesterday's. "Morning," Eli replied, his voice steady, but with a hint of something unfamiliar. Hesitation, perhaps. He placed the next sweater on the counter, careful not to wrinkle it. "This one needs the sleeves fixed. My mother, she used to wear it all the time." Clara picked up the sweater, examining it closely. "I see what you mean. The threads here are starting to fray." She ran her fingers gently along the edges. "Don't worry. I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it," and leaned against the counter. He didn't usually linger indoors. The smell of the shop was comforting but strange to him. The warm light made the colors of the yarn glow, and the quiet atmosphere was unlike the vast open spaces of the ranch. Yet he found himself drawn to it, to her. For a while, neither of them spoke much. Clara hummed softly as she worked, her hands moving skillfully, threading the needle, weaving the yarn back into the worn areas. Eli watched her quietly, noticing the precision in every motion, the gentle way her fingers handled the delicate fabric. It was unlike anything he had seen before, and he found himself admiring not just her skill, but her calm presence. "You work quickly," Eli said after a while, breaking the silence. Clara glanced up and smiled faintly. "It's easier when you enjoy what you do." Ellie nodded, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to conversations like this. Usually, when he spoke, it was about the ranch, the cattle, or the work that needed to be done. But here, in this small, sunlit shop, his words felt clumsy and out of place. He stayed longer than he had intended, leaning on the counter, watching her. At one point, Clara set down her needle and offered him a cup of tea. "You should try it. Helps keep your hands steady," she said. Eli accepted, cradling the warm cup in his rough hands. The contrast between the softness of the tea and the calluses on his palms made him smile faintly. "Thanks," he said simply. Hours passed in a gentle rhythm. Clara worked on the sweaters and Eli watched, occasionally asking questions about the patterns or the yarn. At first the questions were brief, almost practical, but slowly they turned into small stories about his mother, about the ranch, about his childhood. Clara listened carefully, her eyes never leaving him, offering the occasional nod or soft smile. "I never knew my mother could be so patient," Eli said quietly, looking down at the sweater. "She spent hours making these. I didn't understand it when I was younger. Now I wish I had paid more attention." Clara nodded. "Sometimes we don't realize the value of things until later, but it's never too late to honor them." Ellie looked at her, noticing the sincerity in her voice. There was something about the way she spoke that made him feel understood, even without fully explaining himself. It was a strange and new feeling, one that both unsettled and comforted him. As the morning turned into afternoon, a few townsfolk wandered past the shop. Curious about the new customer, Clara greeted them politely but didn't let their presence distract her. Eli noticed her attention to detail, the way she treated everyone with kindness, and felt a quiet respect growing inside him. He had always valued hard work and integrity, but seeing it in her, so gentle, so effortless, made him think about things differently. At one point, Eli picked up a ball of yarn from the counter, testing its texture with his fingers. "I've never done this before," he admitted. "I didn't think I'd be able to understand it." Clara laughed softly, a sound that made the room feel warmer. "It's not as hard as it looks. I can show you a few basic stitches if you want." Eli hesitated. then nodded. He had never learned something like this before, never had the patience for it. But there was a strange comfort in trying, and in the way Clara guided him without criticism. She showed him how to hold the yarn, how to loop the stitches, and how to keep the tension even. He fumbled at first, tangled the yarn more than once, but each time Clara gently corrected him, her hands brushing his briefly as she adjusted his grip. The contact was fleeting but electric, leaving him aware of it long after. "You're getting it," Clara said finally, stepping back. "Not bad for your first try." Eli grinned, a rare expression that made his usually serious face appear almost boyish. "I didn't think I could," he admitted. "It feels nice, though." Clara smiled, sensing the change in him. Sometimes learning something new can make you see the world differently, or yourself differently. Eli looked at her, his eyes meeting hers for a long moment. There was a softness there, an openness, that he wasn't used to seeing. Most people judged him for his rough exterior, his quiet nature, or his tendency to keep to himself. But Clara, she saw him without judgment. That thought alone made him feel lighter than he had in years. The afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the shop in shades of orange and pink. Eli knew it was time to leave, but he wasn't ready to go. Something held him there, a quiet longing he couldn't name. He gathered the sweaters, now partially mended, and placed them in his saddlebag. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice low and sincere, "for everything." Clara smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "You're welcome. I'll have the rest done by tomorrow." Eli nodded, tipping his hat, and stepped outside. He paused for a moment, looking back at the shop. The glow of the sunset made the windows shine like amber, and he felt a strange tug in his chest. He climbed onto his horse, letting the reins rest lightly in his hands, but he did not ride away immediately. The little yarn shop, with its warmth and color, and Clara, with her calm, steady presence, had already begun to change something in him. As he rode back toward the ranch, the wind brushing against his face, Eli thought about the quiet moments he had shared in the shop, the small lessons and the gentle way Clara had guided him. He realized that it wasn't just about the sweaters anymore. It was about the connection, the understanding, and the unexpected comfort of someone seeing him as more than just a cowboy who worked hard and kept to himself. By the time he reached his ranch, the sun had fully set, leaving the sky a deep shade of purple. Eli tied his horse in the stable and walked slowly toward the house. Inside, the familiar smell of leather and hay greeted him, but it felt different now. He thought about Clara, about the way she smiled, the way her hands worked, the way she made even something as simple as mending a sweater feel meaningful. That night, as he sat alone by the fire, Eli found his mind returning again and again to the yarn shop and the woman who ran it. He thought about the small touches, the quiet conversations, the laughter he hadn't expected. For the first time in a long time, he felt anticipation, something that made him hope for the next day, for the next visit, for more of that quiet, gentle connection. He realized that the sweaters were more than just fabric and thread. They were a bridge between past and present, between memory and hope, between him and someone new who had entered his life in the most unexpected way. And for a man like Eli, who had spent so long alone in wide-open spaces, that realization was powerful, almost overwhelming. As he drifted off to sleep, he made a quiet promise to himself. Tomorrow, he would return to the shop, to Clara, and to whatever this new feeling was. He didn't yet know its name, but he knew it was worth discovering. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over Willow Creek, spilling golden light across the fields and streets. The town moved at its usual quiet pace, but inside Clara's crochet and threads, the air was warm with sunlight and the gentle scent of yarn. Clara had already arranged the sweaters she had worked on the day before, and her hands were busy with another delicate piece. The soft rhythm of her sewing filled the room, creating a calm, almost magical atmosphere. Eli arrived soon after, tying his horse outside as usual. He pushed open the door, letting the familiar tinkling bell announce his arrival. Clara looked up from her work, and the corners of her mouth lifted in a small smile. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," Eli replied. He carried the next batch of sweaters carefully, folding them with respect and placing them gently on the counter. There was a quiet intensity in his gaze, a focus that made it clear he was taking this seriously. Clara picked up the first sweater, examining the frayed edges and worn threads. "These are a bit more complicated," she said, nodding thoughtfully, "but I think I can fix them without changing the original design." Eli nodded, his eyes studying her as she worked. He could see the care in every stitch, the patience that guided her hands. It was a slow, careful process, and he realized that something about watching her work calmed him. On the ranch, things were often rushed. Cattle needed attention, fences needed mending. But here, time seemed to move differently. As the morning passed, Eli stayed close by, occasionally asking questions about the patterns or the techniques Clara used. At first, the questions were practical and brief, but slowly they turned into small stories. He spoke about his mother, about how she had taught him to care for animals, about the lessons he had learned growing up on the ranch. Clara listened quietly, offering gentle encouragement and the occasional comment. She never interrupted, never judged, and that made him feel understood in a way he had rarely experienced. At one point, Eli picked up a ball of yarn, testing its texture between his fingers. "It feels soft," he said, almost in wonder. Clara smiled. "Yes, it's very fine. The right yarn makes all the difference. Would you like to try?" He had never done anything like this before, and he didn't want to make a mistake in front of her. But there was something in her calm, patient gaze that made him nod. "All right," he said. Clara guided him carefully, showing him how to hold the yarn, how to loop it through the needle, and how to keep the tension even. At first, Eli struggled. The yarn tangled, the stitches were uneven, and he grew frustrated. But Clara didn't scold him. She adjusted his hands gently, guiding him with patience and encouragement. "You're getting it," she said, her voice soft and kind. "Just a little more practice." Ellie felt a strange sense of pride as he worked. It was a simple thing, something small, but it connected him to his mother in a way he hadn't expected. He realized that this quiet activity, this delicate craft, had more meaning than he had thought. It was not just about mending sweaters. It was about care, patience, and attention to detail. And as he worked, he began to notice Clara in a new way. The way her hair fell softly over her shoulders, the way her eyes lit up when she smiled, the gentle rhythm of her voice. They continued in silence for a while, punctuated only by the soft sound of yarn sliding through fingers and the occasional hum from Clara. Then Eli spoke again. "I never realized how much work goes into this," he said quietly. "My mother, she must have spent hours every day making these." Clara nodded. "It takes time, yes, but it's worth it. Each stitch carries intention, care, and love." Dies. Ali looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. There was truth in them, and he understood it more deeply than he could have anticipated. It wasn't just the sweaters. It was the way Clara approached life, with care and patience, with attention to the smallest details. He found himself admiring her, not just for her skill, but for her character. As the morning turned into afternoon, Eli found himself talking more freely. He shared stories from the ranch, about the animals he cared for, the long days in the sun, and the lessons he had learned from hard work. Clara listened intently, asking questions and offering insights, creating a conversation that was both engaging and comforting. For the first time in a long while, Ellie felt that he could speak openly without fear of judgment. At one point, Clara paused her work and looked at him thoughtfully. "You've carried a lot of responsibility, haven't you?" she asked softly. Ellie nodded, looking down at the counter. "I have. Always have. Sometimes it's been heavy, but it's just the way life is on a ranch." Clara smiled gently. "You've done well. You've honored your mother and taken care of what matters. That's something not everyone can do." Eli felt a warmth in his chest at her words, a rare feeling that made him feel lighter than he had in years. It wasn't just her kindness, it was her understanding, the way she saw beyond the rough exterior to the person underneath. As the afternoon wore on, the sweaters began to take shape. The holes and frayed threads disappeared under Clara's careful hands, replaced with neat, invisible stitches. Eli marveled at the transformation. These were not just sweaters being repaired, they were memories being preserved. And he felt a deep gratitude toward Clara for helping him hold on to them. He stayed longer than he had intended, reluctant to leave the comfort and calm of the shop. At one point, he helped Clara adjust a particularly tricky stitch, and their hands brushed briefly. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a jolt through him. He looked at her, meeting her gaze, and felt something stir inside him. A connection, a recognition, a feeling he could not quite name. Clara smiled softly, noticing the change in him. "You're getting better," she said lightly. "Soon you'll be able to help me more than you think." Ellie chuckled, a deep, low sound that felt unfamiliar to him but satisfying. "I hope so. It feels good to learn this." The sun began to lower in the sky, casting a golden glow through the windows. Eli knew he had to leave, but he found himself hesitant. He had come for the sweaters, yes, but he had found something more, something quiet, comforting, and unexpectedly powerful. Clara's presence, her patience, her warmth, it was changing him in small but undeniable ways. "Tomorrow," he said finally, his voice low and serious, "I'll come back for the rest." Clara nodded, her eyes meeting his with a subtle, knowing look. "I'll be here," she said simply. As Eli rode back to the ranch, the wind brushing against his face, he reflected on the day. The sweaters were important, yes, but they were also a bridge between past and present, between memory and care, between him and someone new who had entered his life unexpectedly. He realized that Clara had given him more than repaired sweaters. She had given him connection, patience, and a glimpse of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. By the time he reached the ranch, the sky was a deep orange, fading into purple at the horizon. He tied his horse in the stable and walked slowly toward the house. Inside, the familiar smells of leather and hay greeted him, but tonight they seemed softer, less heavy. He thought about Clara, about the quiet moments in the shop, about the way she had guided him and shared her patience. Eli realized that he was beginning to look forward to the next day, not just for the sweaters, but for the time spent in the shop, for the chance to learn more, and for the quiet joy of being near someone who understood him. For a man who had spent most of his life alone on open fields and dusty trails, it was an unfamiliar but welcome feeling. That night, as he lay in his bed, Eli thought about the sweaters, about Clara, and about the strange, gentle tug he felt in his heart. He did not yet understand it fully, but he knew it was something important, something worth nurturing. The sweaters were mended, yes, but what was growing between him and Clara was something far more delicate and precious. And for the first time in a long time, Eli felt a hope that made sleep come easier, dreams sweeter, and the promise of tomorrow brighter. The next morning, Willow Creek was quiet, but a sense of expectation seemed to linger in the air. Inside Clara's crochet and threads, the sunlight poured through the windows, reflecting off the colorful yarns and casting warm patterns on the wooden floor. Clara was already at work, humming softly as she mended one of the sweaters Eli had brought in. Each stitch was careful, precise, and full of intention. Eli arrived soon after, riding his horse with a steady rhythm. He tied it outside and stepped into the shop. The familiar tinkle of the bells sounded above the door, and Clara looked up. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a quiet recognition passing between them. And then she smiled. "Morning," she said softly. "Morning," Eli replied, placing the last batch of sweaters on the counter. His hands were steady, but his chest felt heavier than usual. There was something in the air today, a subtle tension that he couldn't name. But Clara picked up the first sweater, running her fingers gently over the worn fabric. "These are the last ones," she said. "I think you'll be pleased." Ellie nodded, his eyes following her movements. He had grown used to the rhythm of their mornings together, to the quiet companionship, and now the thought of leaving this shop, even for a moment, felt uncomfortable. He had come to enjoy not only the work being done, but the small, silent connection between them, the way they had learned to communicate without words, and the comfort of her presence. As Clara worked, Eli leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. The hum of her sewing, the gentle rustle of yarn, and the soft light created an almost magical atmosphere. He realized that this shop and the woman in it had begun to mean more to him than he could admit. At one point, Clara paused and looked up at him. "You've been coming here every day," she said softly. "Do you enjoy it?" Eli hesitated. He wasn't used to answering questions about his feelings. Usually, he would shrug or give a brief, practical answer. But today felt different. Something in Clara's gaze made him want to be honest. "I do," he said quietly. "It's peaceful here. And I like learning from you." But Clara smiled, a warmth in her eyes that made Eli look away briefly. He wasn't used to feeling nervous around anyone, but there was a subtle pull in her presence that made his heart beat a little faster. They continued in silence for a while, working side by side. Eli tried to focus on the sweaters, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Clara, her gentle movements, the careful way she handled each piece of yarn, and the soft kindness in her eyes. He realized that he was noticing more than just her skill. He was noticing her entirely. The quiet rhythm was interrupted when a visitor arrived, a man from the ranch where Eli worked, stopping by with a message. He looked at Eli with a curious expression and then glanced at Clara, offering a polite nod. "You staying busy in here?" he asked casually. Eli nodded, keeping his tone neutral. "Yes, just getting these sweaters mended." The man left shortly after, but the brief visit left a shadow of doubt in Clara's mind. She noticed the way Eli's shoulders stiffened slightly, the tension that appeared in his posture. She didn't understand it yet, but she could sense that there were things in his life that were complicated, things he wasn't ready to share. Clara focused on her work, but a small worry lingered in her heart. She cared about Eli in ways she hadn't expected, and she didn't want him to feel burdened by anything. She reminded herself to be patient and gentle, giving him the space he needed while still offering support in the small ways she could. As the afternoon wore on, Eli began to feel a quiet frustration building inside him. He had been avoiding certain truths, certain feelings, and now they seemed to press closer to the surface. He glanced at Clara, who was focused on her sewing, and realized he didn't want to leave, not just for the sweaters, but for the comfort of her presence. Suddenly a thought crossed his mind. What if Clara misunderstood him? What if she thought his visits were only about the sweaters, only about the work? He wanted her to know that he valued her, her kindness, and her patience more than he could express in words. But he didn't know how to say it. Clara, sensing a change in his demeanor, looked up. "Eli, is something wrong?" she asked softly. He shook his head quickly, forcing a calm tone. "No, nothing, Processa." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. There was a tension between them now, a delicate thread of unspoken emotion that neither could ignore. For the next hour they worked in near silence. The sweaters were slowly becoming whole again, each stitch restoring not just the fabric, but a sense of connection between them. Eli found himself stealing glances at Clara, noticing the small details, the way her hair fell across her face, the gentle focus in her eyes, the curve of her smile when she was pleased with her work. Finally, Clara set down her needle and looked at him directly. "Eli, I need to ask you something," she said. "Do you come here only for the sweaters, or is there something else?" He had been avoiding this question for days, maybe weeks, and now it was here, clear and unavoidable. He swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. The truth was simple, yet terrifying. "It's not just the sweaters," he admitted finally. I like being here. I like you. I didn't expect it, but I do." Clara's eyes widened slightly, and then a soft smile appeared. She didn't speak immediately, letting the moment settle between them. There was a quiet understanding in her gaze, an acknowledgement of the feeling that had been growing slowly and silently between them. Ellie felt relief, mixed with vulnerability. He had said the words, exposed a part of himself that he usually kept hidden. And now, in the warmth of the shop, with the sun casting golden light across the room, he realized that this admission had brought them closer, even in its uncertainty. They continued working, but the atmosphere had shifted. There was a softness now, a subtle tension of anticipation and curiosity. Each glance, each brush of hands, each shared smile carried more weight than before. They were no longer just a man and a woman in a shop. They were two people discovering a connection that had quietly grown into something significant. As the afternoon light began to fade, Eli knew it was time to leave. The sweaters were finished, repaired with care, but the emotional threads between them were still delicate and unresolved. He gathered the mended sweaters, carefully folding them and placing them in his saddlebag. "I should go," he said quietly, his voice steady but soft. Clara nodded, a small, understanding smile on her face. "I'll be here tomorrow," she said simply. Eli tipped his hat and stepped outside, but he did not mount his horse immediately. He stood for a moment, looking back at the shop. The warmth of the light, the calm of the room, and the gentle presence of Clara lingered in his mind. He realized that leaving now felt harder than it ever had. As he rode back to the ranch, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink, Eli reflected on the day. The sweaters were important, yes, but what had happened in the shop was even more significant. He had admitted his feelings, confronted the uncertainty, and discovered that Clara's understanding and kindness were a rare gift he did not want to lose. That night, as he sat by the fire in his ranch house, Eli thought about the delicate moments in the shop, the quiet glances, the soft conversations, the unspoken connection that had grown between them. He realized that this was more than friendship or gratitude. It was something fragile, delicate, and precious. He could not yet name it fully, but he knew it mattered. And for a man who had spent most of his life alone on wide-open fields, that realization was both frightening and wonderful. It was a feeling worth exploring, worth nurturing, and worth protecting. Eli fell asleep with the images of the shop and Clara's face in his mind. The sweaters rested in his saddlebag, mended and whole. But the bond between him and Clara was even more intact, stitched together with unspoken understanding, growing trust, and the beginning of something that neither of them could ignore. Tomorrow would bring more work, more conversation, and perhaps the next step in the delicate journey they were beginning together. And for the first time in a long time, Eli felt that life held more than routine and solitude. It held the possibility of something deeper, something gentle, and something lasting. The next morning, Willow Creek was calm, but there was a quiet excitement in the air that neither Eli nor Clara could ignore. Inside Clara's crochet and threads, sunlight poured through the windows, casting a soft glow on the finished sweaters neatly folded on the counter. Clara was already at work on a few small finishing touches, her hands moving with care and precision. The shop smelled faintly of lavender and warm fabric, comforting in a way that made it feel like a safe space away from the world. Eli arrived shortly after sunrise, riding his horse with a steady, familiar rhythm. He tied it outside and stepped into the shop, the bell chiming softly as usual. Clara looked up from her work, and a small smile appeared on her face. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. "Morning," she said, her voice warm and gentle. "Morning," Eli replied, placing the completed sweaters on the counter. He studied them carefully, running his fingers over the neat stitches and repaired edges. Each sweater had been restored to its former beauty, preserving the memories they carried. But it wasn't just the sweaters that mattered anymore. He felt a connection with Clara that had grown slowly over the past days, a connection that was stronger than any he had ever known. Clara picked up the first sweater, examining it with care. "They're ready," she said softly. "Your mother would be proud." Ellie nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "They look perfect," he said quietly. "Thank you for everything." Clara met his gaze, sensing the unspoken words between them. There was a quiet understanding in her eyes, a recognition of the bond that had formed between them. She didn't speak immediately, letting the moment linger, allowing Eli the space to find his own words. For a while they worked side by side, finishing the last few minor repairs and adjustments. Eli had learned a little more about crochet, though he still struggled with some of the more intricate stitches. Clara guided him gently, her hands brushing his occasionally as she adjusted his technique. Each touch was brief but electric, leaving him aware of it long after. "You're improving," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "I think you might even be able to do this on your own soon." Ali chuckled, a low, deep sound that carried warmth. "Maybe," he admitted. "It's harder than it looks, but satisfying." The afternoon passed in a quiet, comfortable rhythm. Sunlight shifted across the shop, painting the walls with patterns of gold and orange. Eli found himself stealing glances at Clara more often than before, noticing the small details, the way her hair fell across her shoulders, the gentle curve of her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she was pleased with her work. He realized that he had come to care deeply for her, in a way that went far beyond gratitude for mending sweaters. Clara, too, noticed the change in him. She could see it in the way he lingered, the way his eyes followed her movements, and the small, unspoken moments that spoke louder than words. She felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet excitement that made her pulse quicken. She had come to care for Eli as well, though she had tried to keep it subtle, unsure if he felt the same. Finally, when the last stitches were complete, Clara set down her needle and looked at him. "They're finished," she said. "Every one of them." Ellie nodded, taking a deep breath. I can't thank you enough," he said quietly. "Not just for fixing the sweaters, but for your patience, your guidance, for everything." Clara smiled, sensing the depth of his words. "You're welcome," she said softly. "I'm glad I could help." There was a moment of silence, comfortable and full of meaning. Eli felt his heart beating faster, a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. He knew that what he wanted to say next was important, something that could change the quiet rhythm of their mornings forever. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small object wrapped carefully in a piece of cloth. I got this for you," he said, handing it to her. Clara unwrapped it carefully, revealing a simple but beautifully embroidered cowboy hat. The stitching matched some of the patterns she had used in the sweaters, delicate and intricate. Her eyes widened slightly as she looked up at him. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Eli nodded, his voice steady but full of feeling. "I wanted to give it to you, as a thank you and for something more. I came here to get the sweaters fixed, but I found something else." "I found you." Clara felt her heart swell. She had suspected his feelings, felt the quiet pull between them, but hearing him say it out loud was more powerful than she had imagined. She smiled, her eyes shining. I feel the same way," she admitted. "I've felt it since the first day you came here." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The sweaters rested on the counter, the sunlight painted the shop with warmth, and Eli and Clara stood facing each other, hearts beating in quiet unison. It was a moment of understanding, of acknowledgement, of the beginning of something beautiful. Eli reached out, gently taking Clara's hand in his. The touch was soft, careful, but filled with meaning. "I don't want to leave this," he said quietly. "Not just the shop, not just the sweaters. I don't want to leave you." Clara's hand tightened around his. "You don't have to," she said softly. Stay, if you want. Stay with me." Eli felt a wave of relief and happiness wash over him. For so long he had been alone, used to the vast emptiness of the ranch and the quiet of his own company. But now he realized that companionship, understanding, and love could be just as powerful and fulfilling as the open fields he had always cherished. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments. Eli helped Clara put away the finished sweaters, each piece now restored and full of life. They talked about small things, plans for the ranch, ideas for new crochet projects, and memories from their pasts. The connection between them deepened with every word, every gesture, every glance. As the sun began to set, painting the shop in warm shades of orange and gold, Eli realized that this day marked a turning point. The sweaters had been repaired, yes, but more importantly, something delicate, and fragile had been nurtured and made whole, something far more important than fabric or thread. He looked at Clara, noticing the gentle light in her eyes, the warmth of her smile, and the quiet strength in her presence. He knew, without a doubt, that this was where he belonged. Clara reached out, resting her hand lightly on his arm. "Ellie, I'm glad you stayed," she said softly. Ellie smiled, feeling a deep contentment he had not known in years. "So am I," he replied. "So am I." They stood together in the shop as the last rays of sunlight faded, a quiet promise hanging between them. The sweaters were finished, the work complete, but their story was just beginning. In the simple, gentle moments of understanding, trust, and affection, Eli and Clara discovered that love could grow quietly, patiently, and beautifully, even in the smallest of shops in a quiet town like Willow Creek. When Eli finally mounted his horse that evening, it was not to leave as he had before. This time he stayed a little longer, looking back at the shop and the woman who had changed his life in ways he had never expected. Clara waved softly, and he waved back, a smile on both their faces, knowing that tomorrow, and every day after, would be different. For Eli, the sweaters were more than mended fabric. They were a reminder of his mother, of care, of connection, and now of love. And for Clara, the quiet, patient cowboy who had entered her shop had become someone she could trust, care for, and eventually love. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple, Eli rode back toward the ranch, but his heart stayed in the shop. It stayed with Clara, with the sweaters, and with the promise of something lasting, gentle, and beautiful. And in that quiet evening, as the wind rustled through the trees and the town settled into calm, both of them knew that they had found something rare and precious, something worth cherishing for the rest of their lives.